Now rents have gone up in Waterford, highest of any city in the country in the last 12 months. 15.2%. 15.2% increase in rents. Is the housing crisis real? And how real is it? Spoke to a businessman this morning who literally can't get housing for his staff. And Regina Mangan is on the line as well. She is with Book a Room letting agencies, and she's been talking about this for quite a number of years. Regina, good morning.
Good morning, Damien.
Good to talk to you this morning. It's a nice morning in West Waterford and in Ryan, looking out over the beautiful topography. And yet, if people are looking closer underneath the surface and looking for a house to buy, or specifically a house to rent, they would be looking a very long time, wouldn't they?
It's a dreadful situation, actually, Damien. And just to share a story with you, there's a teacher that's very well known to me, and she lives in Dungarvan currently. And she has a budget of 200,000 she'd like to buy. She's a single parent with 2 children, and she can't buy anything with that budget. Now, she's currently in a rental property, and the landlord is selling up, and she has 6 weeks to vacate, and there is nowhere for her to go. Nowhere. She's distraught. And really, there's not... Now, Mary isn't her real name. I'm using the name Mary for confidentiality reasons, but I know Mary very well, and look, she sent me on all the references, which I knew would be excellent before I even read them. But that's a real problem. And when you look at the draft report now that came out today, they're talking about Waterford's rent increases are higher than anywhere else in Ireland. And I just read it, and I just thought I'd love the opportunity to speak to the listeners and sort of share my take on the situation.
Okay, well, we'll talk about some of the problems in a minute and how we've got to this point of crisis and what needs to be done about it. But just to remind our listeners, as of last night and this morning, we're looking at 9 properties to rent in the entire Waterford city and county. 3 of those are private and 6 are student accommodation. So 3 properties to rent in the entire city and county, a population of around 115,000, 118,000 people. My goodness, Regina, this is a crisis.
It is, and if you recall, Damien, I predicted this. I've been saying this for 5 years. I said it's going to get worse. It's getting worse and worse and worse. And there's no proper strategy by government. Shame on government, really shame on government. This is a political issue now, actually, in my view, not a housing issue, right? It's time government did something about it. The supply levels have shrunk to a fraction of what we used to have available in the last 10 years. And that reason is because the landlords are fleeing the market. Now,
so just before we go into that, we had John Cummins on the other day, who's the Fine Gael spokesperson on housing in the Shannon and one of the main spokespersons on housing in the country for the party. And he says there's a lot being done. We have affordable houses coming on stream. There'll be more houses. And that may be in relating to supply of some houses going to be built. But you're saying in terms of rental properties, the government has been completely remiss in their responsibility.
Actually, no, reckless. Reckless is the word I would use. I'm sorry.
Why? Okay, explain that. Why have they been reckless?
Well, at the end of the day, it's a bit like, check out the oil prices, right? They're rising and rising. Why is that? They're rising because of lack of supply. Okay, it's the law of scarcity. It's basic economics. So here we are, and we've no supply, so prices are rising. Okay, so that's one scenario. And landlords are fleeing the market. The reason they are is because of the tax treatment. Now, I know that's not a popular thing. Landlords are greedy, landlords are this, landlords are that. Whether we like it or not, the private landlord is the supplier of the stock. Okay, so common sense must prevail. Yes. Why are they leaving? Because out of €1,000 rental income, the landlord nets in the region of 400. I mean, they get €1,000 and they lodge 400. Now, in actual fact, a huge proportion of landlords don't even get to lodge 400 because they actually have mortgages to repay. So they actually owe the bank. They probably are minus €200 to €300 a month. I've loads of landlords in that predicament.
So are you saying that the rental income for a private landlord, 60% of that goes on taxes. Is that what you're saying?
In the region of 50%. So if you can imagine you're a landlord and you own a property, right, and the boiler goes, right, that's the bones of €1,000 to replace. So that comes out of your income. Because obviously the landlord's responsible for all the expenses. And rightly so in terms of...
Okay, but it's not 60%. They're not taxed at 60%. Let's get this clear.
They're taxed in the region of 50%, right? And then when you look at the maintenance costs and everything, like it can be over 50% when you look at your action... Because the tax treatment is the same as your PAYE income. And sometimes a teacher, let's say, and a guard who own a house, right? Typical landlords, right? They might own one property. So when they get the income from the rent, that's treated as if it's an extra bump in their salary, just for simplicity purposes. So it takes them up into the next tax bracket. And so they pay in the region of half of their income on tax. And then there's the expenses. And let's face it, the tax levels are going up and up because you now have to register the RTB every year. So if you have a tenancy, you have to register that. And the RTB is a tax. What else is it? You can dress it up as much you like.
No, I understand, and it's the same, like revenue will say that like income from renting a property or from another source that qualifies as rental income is taxable. And you have to declare this income. You can offset obviously something in terms of expenses against that, but there are very many, as you say, costs associated with, and then doing up and keeping properties up to a certain level. Do you think this current do you think this current major problem is caused primarily, as you say, the lack of supply, but as much by landlords exiting the market?
Oh, it's driven by landlords exiting the market, and thus the net result is lack of supply. So, like, they're racing out, like, the stats are there. So, like, there are people renting properties. You don't put them on the portals like Daft or My Home because you can't cope with the demand. But it's a real issue. Like, I had a businessman in Dungarvan ring me up, and he has 3 staff that he needs accommodation for. There is none. I can't pull it out of the bag. There is none in West Waterford. And in Waterford City, if you want a property, if you want a house and you're a family, let's say doctors, nurses moving to the area for contracts, somebody getting notice, I might find them a house, but it might take me 3 to 4 months. I've never witnessed that. I'm 25 years in business. I've never, ever seen it as bad. Now, the government can talk about all what they're going to do about this, that and the other being built. Where are the social houses being built? That won't be enough to satisfy supply. And where will Mary live? And never mind all the families that have come from Ukraine. Like, you have over 50 families now in the sports centre in Dungarvan. That's not sustainable for them to stay there a long time. Obviously, it's better than the horrific environment they've come from. But if there's no house for Mary, there's no house for the Ukraine families, and there's no properties for the students.
You're Minister for Housing. Give me 3 things that you'll do immediately.
They have to address the tax treatment of rental income.
So give a tax
credit for tenants as well.
Tax credit for tenants. So you'll reduce tax on landlords. You can do that immediately with a swipe of a pen. Would you do that immediately? You would?
Categorically, yes. Well, there'd have to be, if the landlord gets a tax credit, then there has to be something in it for the tenant. I would look at that they can't sell their property for 5 years, for example. So they have to sign up to something. It has to be a win-win, because tenants getting notices because the landlords are selling is worsening the position.
But that's not also going to bring landlords back into the market, those that have exited the market, will it?
No, but possibly some. Look, those Section 23s, whatever went wrong or right with them, they brought people into the rental market. People are looking for investments, right? If you look now at the moment, banks are charging people with cash. Now, people might say they've no cash in the bank, but the people who will supply the market have cash in the bank, and they need to earn money from that cash and draw them into the rental market again. The cost of building, right? You can't build apartments in Waterford because you can't sell them at a price for the cost of building with a profit.
And again, the government would say that that's out of their hands.
What are we going to do? Are we going to have more people sleeping on the streets? Where will the people live? I mean, where would they live? We now have a University of the South East in Waterford. Where are the students living? I discovered an apartment block there, another apartment block, which is now no longer a student block, it's private rental because you can't get accommodation for families and individuals. So the situation for students is worsening.
Yeah, there needs to be imaginative thinking, needs to be very, very urgent action. Do you agree that this is a crisis?
Of course it is. The government needs to collaborate with industry people, i.e. like the Institute of Auctioneers and Valuers. They have failed to engage in a meaningful way and actually take action. The problem is most politicians are worried about taking action that's not voter friendly. That's the real issue.
Regina Mangan, good to talk to you this morning. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Damien.
Thanks, Regina. Owen agrees. Approximately 50 properties available on Airbnb in Waterford. That's a large part of the problem. The government has prioritised personal profit over its social responsibilities. Regina is with Liberty Blue, by the way. I said Booker Room. That was the previous company, so it's Liberty Blue is the name of Regina's company. Paul says, if you reduce taxes, where do they get the houses? It'll put up houses for first-time buyers. Quite extensive text in from Rob Cass, and Rob is very, very adamant that the issue of vacant tenancies and vacant properties has to be addressed. He says the value of vacancies is 1.1 billion across the county, yet the council has collected no tax nor intends not to collect the 70 million tax coming in November under the vacant homes tax. And he's very critical of the issues and says the councillors need to do this and need to talk about the county development plan and issues such as that. 083 333 975